Welcome. Today we are going to be taking a look at one of my songs. This is a song called Triumphs and Tales. I would say this is not complete, although it's one of the ones that's pretty close to it. What we're going to be taking a look at today is just how this song is structured, what goes into the song, all the different elements. As you can see, it looks right now like it's fairly simple, but each of these are actually tracks, stacks with a few different elements in them. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'll explain some of these. I won't necessarily be able to explain every single piece of this, but I will do my best to walk you through the composition of the song. I will say a lot of the elements of it have already been bounced to audio, so I might not have the original MIDI and might not be able to pull up the original tool that it was from, but I will be able to explain to you exactly what the process was to get there. So what we'll do is now we'll give it a little bit of a quick listen. I gave you a quick teaser at the beginning there, but we'll give it a little bit of a quick listen. I'll probably just let it cruise along for maybe the first, 60 to 90 seconds. I'll sit here awkwardly while you listen. I hope you enjoy. This is a song called Triumphs and Tales. So we'll actually get back and listen to the rest of the song together in just a second, but I wanted to stop right there and I wanted to take a quick look at what's going on in this beginning of the song. So you'll see here the compositional arrangement. I'd say everything over here, these three bottom channels are irrelevant. They're grayed out. You don't have to think about those at all. But what we're going to be looking at is at some of these track stacks. So we'll start with the melodics over here. Right over here, we have Omnisphere. It's a synth. It's a very powerful and fantastic tool. Highly recommend. We have I believe it's a Rhodes piano. I use it a lot. Just playing an arpeggiated chord pattern. And then over here, we have, I think this was likely, knowing myself, that was likely like a reverb tal. Like I probably echoed out a sound and then just echoed it out a bunch, threw on reverb on it, and then turned it into a pad. In this next section over here, we have the chords coming in, I believe. Yeah. Over here, I think that might be a riser. Yeah, well, not necessarily a riser, but a melodic turnaround sound. I think this might be something similar. Yeah. So that's the same thing and echoed out. And then over here we have the trumpet. So the trumpets actually come from Native Instruments Contact Session Horns 2, I believe. I'm a big fan of their horns. I use their muted trumpet all over my music. Once you hear it, you'll hear it in probably every song that I write just because it's such a clean sound. But and to be clear, none of these are samples. I mean, I use some samples for the individual drum hits, but in terms of the melodics, everything is stuff that I either play out on my keyboard or like on my computer or on the little piano that I have over there. So that's kind of for the intro section. That is the melodics. And then there's also this right here, which is a pretty heavily distorted. I'll just play both layers. It's kind of like a re-space riser kind of thing. And usually that's just done by, I think that might have been something where from the, I have to actually check. Yeah, because those already bounced to audio. It might have just been a synth that I distorted and compressed, and there's a nice little pattern that you can do where you run something heavily compressed into a limiter, and then you bounce it to audio, and you do that a couple of times, and maybe add on a bit crusher, and it will really start to make something be a little bit gritty in the way that is. So I think that's where that came from. A couple other elements here in the intro. This is a glitch sound that happens later on in the song, so I probably just pulled that out just for the intro. And, that's basically it. You have the second part of the intro over here, where you have the kick coming in. Something that you can do with your kicks, actually, that's really powerful is you can have your kick split in half. So over here, I have the kick where it's just kind of open. It's the sample. I use this usually it's like a 909 from this NDS kit that I downloaded a long time ago. Don't even know where I got it. Probably somewhere online. But I like the way that their drums sound. I used it in a lot of my songs, but it's just if you need a clean 909, it's perfectly fine. The 909 is kind of like the standard like house style kick, where it's like kind of like a little bit big and thumpy, but it can also oftentimes be used in hip hop compared to like an 808, which has that like big long tail of a bass line that kind of follows it. A 909 is just that clean kind of punchy hit coming from the Roland 909 machine. And then over here, it's basically the same exact sample, but what I did is I EQ'd out the low end. And then just made the mid end a little bit more punchier. So what that does is, if I have this going a little bit quietly, I have the actual kick drum sitting at about -9 dB. But if I have the mids of it actually punching through at around, this one's at -1.6, what it does is it allows me to get a pretty punchy kick, but where I can also control the mids and make those a little bit louder and give the kick a little bit more presence without actually pushing the sub bass too much, which is a really nice little trick that you can do. In terms of the drums, we'll take a quick look at them. I've got a snare, I believe, right here. Just a snare from a sample. I've got a few hi-hats from just some random sample packs. I've downloaded most of my sample packs probably a decade ago at this point. Again, you don't need the fanciest samples. You don't need the fanciest anything. You just need to have the right sounds. And if you've got the right sound, it doesn't matter if you've got 30 of them or if you've got one of them. If it works, it works. So that's the intro. Next up, we'll just kind of go ahead and give this another quick listen going into the next section. We'll let it play for a second longer into the next section, and then I'll kind of go over some of the sounds there. Although you'll see that this is not a particularly complex song. There's no crazy B section. There's a little bit of a break over here. But it's not like a journey song that goes on for 8 minutes. The song, I think the whole song is less than 2 minutes and 45 seconds. I think less than 3 minutes. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. But I'll let it play into the next section, and we'll take a look at what this kind of A section looks like. Alright, so we get to that point again. I'm going to have to stop it there, though. So what we'll do now is we'll start by looking at the mid bass. So over here, this right here is the one that you hear kind of right at the beginning. I think it's a little bit too loud in the mix. That's one of the things I have in my notes to actually fix up. So that's actually just the sub bass. So, and just the mid-range and the heavily distorted version of that. So the sub bass is going to be your bass line that's in the lower end, usually below 80 hertz, roughly in like the 30 to 80 hertz range. Human ear can hear between 20 to 20,000 hertz. For example, dogs can hear like 5 to 50,000. That's why dogs get so freaked out at super high and super low frequencies. But the human ear can hear between 20 to 20,000 hertz. Usually sub bass is going to be hitting between about 30 to 80 hertz is the approximate range. So you want to make sure, and that's the same thing with the kick drum, you want to make sure that when you have that low end of the kick drum coming through, that you have that isolated so that you can control that. Because if you have uncontrolled audio going through a subwoofer, especially if you have multiple layers and they're kind of overlapping and it gets really dirty, you can really blow out a speaker pretty quickly. So you got to be very mindful of that. We'll take a look at the sub bass over here real quick. Nothing too fancy. You might not be able to hear that unless you have pretty good headphones on. But that's basically the low end. It's just matching what you heard with that mid bass. Then with the rest of the mid bass over here, there is this is kind of that same riser, distorted, heavily kind of respaced riser that you heard in the beginning. And then, the drums are pretty much the same throughout. Maybe I can make the drums a bit more complicated if I wanted to. I don't think it needs it. This sound right over here we'll take a quick look at. This is likely, if I had to guess, probably coming from the hi-hat pattern. I do that a lot where I'll kind of duplicate the hi-hat pattern and then run it into like a grain device where it'll kind of deconstruct it a little bit and give you some kind of unique, somewhat random sounds. If this didn't come from that, probably some percussive element, but it's something where you can add in a layer, a texture into your audio if you wanted to give it a little bit of a glitchier sound. There's a free tool and tool set actually called Michael Norris, and then his grain streamer. I use it a lot. It's not the most perfect thing. You don't get a ton of control with it, but for a free tool, if you wanted to just do some very basic kind of destructive grain design, you can really do some, relatively interesting randomized stuff with that. Again, there are people who are way better at all of this kind of stuff than I am. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this is my ideas. A lot of this stuff there's a lot of pioneers who have done a lot of this kind of stuff well before me. But it is something that I like to add on as just another layer to kind of make the percussion and the rhythm of it a little bit more interesting. And you can hear it in context again. Let's just go ahead and press play. And you can hear, I'll play that sound on its own one more time. How it just kind of sits inside the rhythm and ends up just falling kind of inside of the song, without it really being too specific to the actual song or having much of a melodic element to it. It's something that I like to do. So now that we're at this point, we're going to go to the next section. This next section is pretty straightforward. You'll find that this song is pretty straightforward. There's no major surprises from this point forward other than just a song that you're going to listen to. So I appreciate you hanging out. Appreciate you enjoying this as well. So now we're going to go into the break section here. It's basically, if I remember correctly, it's really carried over by the melodics, by the trumpet melodics, and then I think it kind of has a trumpet layer that I don't think actually has been introduced now that I remember it. So there is going to be a new element in here, but nothing too crazy. It's just going to be kind of a bass trumpet layer underneath. And I'll pause that right there real quick just to kind of go through it. You see the drums are kind of continuing to roll on. I think that in this song, if I were to zoom in a little bit more on the drums, you could see in the next section I kind of chop out a little bit of the drums just to give it a little bit of rhythmic variance. But for right now, the drums are just cruising along. You have this trumpet section. And then you also have a couple... So again, over there you've got that reverbed out pad. That's probably an echo from one of the other songs. And then over here you have just you can see there's a lot of echo, a lot of reverb on this trumpet, and it just kind of fades in pretty aggressively there. And that's just to kind of make a sound kind of sit naturally. Sometimes when you're composing digitally, even though the thing that I like about these contact sounds, the native instrument sounds, and specifically the session horns, is that it's actually from real trumpets. They actually have people in studio, so you're actually, for all intents and purposes, playing an actual instrument. Although, you know, there's some differences between playing it on a piano and playing it on the actual trumpet. And you wouldn't want to hear me play it on the trumpet. But the nice thing is, though, that sometimes these sounds, when they don't have any effects or they don't have another layer, it can just sound kind of sudden when they stop. So what you do is, and what I'm doing here is I'm adding another layer quieter in the background where it kind of just hangs over and just lets it kind of transition and cover up the beginning of the new measure, the beginning of the new bar, so that you don't even necessarily realize. Because sometimes you hear it a lot in house music where you're listening to house music and it's like do 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 do, and you can hear every single time every measure starts, every time every bar starts, and it can become very stiff. And so that's something that you can do is you can use these kind of melodic reverb tails to kind of hide the measure, hide the beginning of the measure, hide the beginning of where the next section starts or where a transition is happening. There's lots of other ways that you can do it, but that's one way that I personally like to, is just echoing out a melodic that's ending, and it will usually just kind of cover up a lot of that transition. So going back to this break section, we'll just listen to that horn line one more time. It'll go into the next section, and then there'll be like one more kind of B section that's going to be very similar to this A section over here. We're just going to listen to it out. At this point, there's not too much new stuff happening in the song other than some micro edits with like where specific things are placed, or in terms of, I think, with some of the volume parameters on the mid bass. I think there's some edits that are going on over here. Yeah, you can see this. I edited and then I bounced it out so that it would have just be locked in. But other than that, there's nothing really too crazy going on in the song. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hit play. We're going to listen to the song, and I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to hang out. Let's listen to the rest of this song and enjoy. Thank you so much for listening. This is a song called Triumphs and Tales. It'll be out eventually sometime. The music project name is called Questpace. Questpace Music. You can look it up. Got a little bit of a presence, but it's not anything particularly large right now. However, if this is something where these kinds of videos are interesting to you and you would like to see more about this, or if you have any specific questions about any part of this video, feel free to drop a question in the comments below. Because it's YouTube, definitely make sure to like and subscribe as well. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you later. Peace.